Most people believe they are merely describing their lives when they speak, as if their words are nothing more than daily news bulletins. They wake in the pale hours of the morning and, almost without thinking, say, "I am tired." Later they sigh, "I am broke." In moments of solitude, "I am unlucky in love." These phrases seem harmless, casual, statements of fact, but history, science, and the oldest whispers of human culture all suggest otherwise. These are not mere observations. They are commands, subtle, invisible, and binding. For centuries, humans have sensed that language is not just a tool to describe reality, but the chisel that shapes it. In the temples of ancient Egypt, high priests would perform daily rituals, speaking sacred words over statues of the gods, believing that their voice literally sustained the divine presence in stone. In Mesopotamia, the earliest cuneiform inscriptions were not written to record history as we do now, but to declare it into being, royal decrees etched in clay as spells to fix events in the tapestry of fate. The ordinary person, of course, was rarely conscious of such power, yet they too participated in it, repeating phrases like charms, passing them down through generations. Language, especially self-directed language, became the silent architect of identity. And identity, across all cultures and times, has been the foundation upon which destiny is built. Modern life has made this truth easier to miss. We type texts, mutter complaints, post updates, unaware that every statement beginning with "I am" carries a kind of signature, one that the world, or perhaps the universe itself, reads and mirrors back to us. The ancients would have recognized this instantly. They wove stories of word magic into their myths. The Norse sagas told of runes that, when spoken, could heal or kill. The Vedas described mantras as sound vibrations that could align the soul with cosmic law. West African griots spoke names and histories to keep them alive across centuries. Today, science frames it differently. We talk about neuroplasticity, about the way repeated thoughts carve pathways in the brain, or about the quantum field and how observation influences outcome. But beneath the modern vocabulary, the ancient principle survives. You are programming your life every time you open your mouth. And so the tragic irony emerges. We are all programmers, yet most of us write code without knowing it. We compose the same lines day after day. "I am exhausted. I am unlucky. I am not enough." In time, these phrases become more than words. They become identity. The mind stops treating them as passing states and accepts them as permanent truths. And once identity hardens, reality follows its form, as if the world has no choice but to keep reflecting the image we have chosen, even when that choice was unconscious. In the corridors of history, this phenomenon has shaped entire peoples. Think of the Roman plebeian, told from birth he was of the lower order, repeating it in his mind until it became unshakable reality. Think of the 19th century factory worker, convinced by the echo of his society that he was nothing more than a pair of hands in service to the machine. Their worlds were written before they had a chance to speak, but once they spoke, they unknowingly reinforced the script. This is the unseen programming that most of us inherit and maintain. The danger is not in a single negative statement, but in the steady drip of repetition, the slow engraving of limitation into the stone of the self. The ancients warned about careless speech, not for moral reasons alone, but because they understood that words plant seeds, and seeds, whether of weeds or wheat, will grow. And here lies the first turning point in our story. If speech can enslave, it can also liberate. But liberation demands awareness. It demands that we stop reporting the smallness of our lives and begin consciously scripting their expansion. This is not poetry. It is practice. For in the next chapter, we will step into the ancient and modern understanding of why I am is not just the start of a sentence, but the first stroke of the pen with which you write the entire book of your life. In the heart of the Sinai desert, under a sky lit by stars older than memory, an exiled shepherd stood before a bush that burned but was not consumed. From the flames came a voice, not thunderous, not soft, but of a quality that made the air itself seem to hold its breath. When Moses asked for the divine name, the answer was not a title, not a description, but a declaration. I am that I am. It was perhaps the most enigmatic sentence ever spoken in recorded history. To the ancient Hebrews, it was a revelation about the nature of God, not as a being among other beings, but as being itself. The divine essence was self-defined, unconditioned, infinite, and in naming itself, the infinite revealed something about the mechanics of creation. Identity precedes reality. This insight was not unique to the Hebrews. Across the ancient world, civilizations carried their own versions of this truth. In the Vedic texts of India, sages declared Aham Brahmasmi, I am the Absolute. In China, Taoist adepts spoke of the Tao as the nameless source of all, and yet understood that to align with it required a kind of self-recognition beyond the ego. The Sumerians had incantations that began with the speaker's own self-identification before invoking the gods. To speak was to create. To name oneself was to set the coordinates of reality. Modern physics, in its own language, circles the same mystery. The quantum field, as scientists describe it, is a vast sea of potential, where particles exist in a state of possibility until observed. In this metaphor, your words, especially those following I am, act as commands to the field, collapsing one potential reality into form. Just as a musician tunes an instrument to a particular pitch, your declaration tunes your life to a particular frequency. Ancient mystics might have said, the universe listens more to your being than to your requests, and that is why I am carries such weight. It does not simply communicate, it defines. To say I am is to take the raw clay of existence and press your hand into it, leaving an imprint that the rest of reality rushes to fill. Consider how this has played out in human history. In the courts of pharaohs, kings and queens proclaimed themselves divine, and in doing so, shaped the perception of millions, until those millions treated the ruler not as a mortal, but as a living god. The declaration was not mere vanity. It was a strategic act that aligned the ruler's identity with the order of the cosmos as understood by their culture. In medieval Europe, monarchs claimed to rule by divine right, embedding that identity so deeply that it became almost unthinkable to challenge. The pattern repeats on the personal scale. A soldier who declares, I am a warrior, moves and acts differently than one who says, I am just trying to survive. The first lives from identity, the second lives from circumstance. Across time and culture, those who understood this subtle distinction, whether shamans in the Amazon or poets in ancient Persia, used it to direct the flow of their lives with almost surgical precision. This is the language of the universe, not merely sound, but frequency, not merely description, but definition. The ancients preserved it in sacred texts. Modern science maps it in data. And between them lies a bridge, the recognition that to speak I am is to open a channel between the invisible and the visible, the possible and the actual. In the next part, we will cross that bridge, moving from the realm of philosophy into the mechanics of reality itself, where the act of declaring who you are becomes indistinguishable from the act of creating the world you inhabit. Imagine a hall in ancient Delphi. heavy with the scent of burning laurel, where a lone figure sits upon a tripod above a hidden fissure in the earth. She inhales the vapors, her gaze distant, her voice weaving fragments of prophecy. The words of the Pythia, the oracle, were not treated as mere advice. In the minds of kings and generals, they carried the weight of inevitability. When she spoke, reality was expected to bend in her direction. Thousands of years later, in sterile laboratories, physicists began to notice something unsettling in their own experiments. The mere act of observing a particle altered its behavior. In the famous double-slit experiment, electrons behaved like a wave of possibilities until someone measured them. Then, as if under the gaze of the oracle herself, they chose a single form. This is the observer effect, a concept that modern science frames in terms of subatomic behavior, yet it resonates eerily with the ancient belief that consciousness can shape destiny. Both the oracle and the physicist's apparatus point to the same truth. The way something is seen changes what it becomes. And if that's true for particles and politics, what does it mean for the way we see ourselves? Your self-description, those quiet I am statements muttered under your breath, are acts of observation. They are not neutral. Each one is a collapse of possibility into a single outcome. In quantum mechanics, the wave function doesn't care about morality, intention, or fairness. It responds to the parameters of observation. The human mind works the same way. You may hold within you infinite potential selves, but the identity you consistently affirm is the one that crystallizes into reality. History offers striking examples of this principle at work. Consider Alexander the Great, who carried a copy of Homer's Iliad wherever he went, modeling himself after Achilles. By consistently observing himself through the lens of the hero, he moved as if destined for greatness, and the world in turn treated him as such. Or think of Joan of Arc, who declared herself the chosen messenger of God. Her unshakable identity turned a teenage peasant into a military commander who altered the course of nations. But the observer effect is not always a blessing. The same principle that lifts one life into legend can cement another into quiet ruin. In medieval Europe, serfs repeated the narrative of their own lowliness until it became an invisible prison. In 20th century propaganda, entire populations were taught to see themselves in narrow, degraded terms, and so they lived down to the image imposed upon them. Observation, whether internal or external, sets the boundaries of what we believe possible. The Tibetan monks, who chant mantras for hours each day, understand this well. Their repetition is not aimless devotion. It is the deliberate, rhythmic observation of a reality they wish to bring forth. They know that the mind must be trained to see and feel that reality until the field of possibility gives way under the pressure of coherence. The lesson is clear. If you wish to alter your life, you must alter the way you observe yourself. You must replace casual, unconscious declarations with deliberate, coherent ones. Every I am becomes a lens, and through it, you choose which version of you comes into focus. In the next part, we will turn to the hidden danger that ensnares most people, the unconscious use of I am as a tool of self-sabotage, where the observer effect works perfectly, but toward an identity no one would consciously choose. There is a quiet danger in the way most people speak about themselves, so quiet it hides in plain sight. It is not the grand, dramatic mistake that alters a life in an instant, but the slow erosion of possibility through repetition. Day after day, we attach I am to passing moods, fleeting struggles, or inherited beliefs, until these temporary states harden into the pillars of our identity. Consider the worker in the soot-choked streets of 19th century Manchester who says, "I am tired" at the start of each shift. At first, it's simply true. His body aches from the long hours. But over years, the phrase mutates. "I'm tired" becomes, "I'm a tired man." And eventually, I'm the kind of man who has no energy for anything else. In the mind's ledger, this is no longer a condition to change, but a truth to live by. History shows us how this trap has been used, consciously or otherwise, to keep entire populations in place. In medieval Europe, peasants rarely questioned their station because they had been told, and had told themselves, that they were born to serve. The phrase might not have been, "I am worthless," but the effect was the same. Their language shaped their self-perception, and their self-perception fixed their destiny. Propaganda masters of the 20th century understood this perfectly. They knew that to weaken a people, you did not need to shackle their bodies. You only had to convince them to chain their own minds. They fed the public carefully crafted slogans that people began to repeat without thinking, each repetition carving the message deeper into the collective identity. Once embedded, it was nearly impossible to uproot because the victims believed it was simply who they were. The tragedy is that the universe, whether you see it as a quantum field or a divine intelligence, does not sort your declarations into true or false, good or bad. It reflects back the frequency you emit. If your dominant broadcast is "I am unlucky," then you live tuned to the station of misfortune, and the world obliges with matching events. Even in our personal lives, the effect can be devastating. Someone might say, "I am bad with money," not realizing they are engraving that belief into the subconscious, like a royal seal pressed into wax. No matter how many budgeting books they read or extra hours they work, the identity beneath the action will override the effort. The field reads the dominant signal, not the hopeful whisper. And yet the most dangerous aspect of this trap is its invisibility. These self-statements often ride beneath our awareness, muttered internally rather than aloud. They hum like static in the background, their influence constant and unquestioned. If you have been saying, "I am not enough" for 10 years, you may no longer hear the words, but the field still does. Breaking free begins not with grand declarations of power, but with awareness. The ancient Stoics taught this through the discipline of self-examination. The Buddhists call it mindfulness, catching the mind in the act of its unconscious habits. For both, the first victory is not replacing the old identity, but seeing it clearly for what it is, a program, not a truth. In the next part, we will turn to the antidote, the state of consciousness that the ancients revered and that modern thinkers have begun to rediscover. A state in which "I am" becomes the most creative force you possess. They called it the God state. The phrase "God state" might sound, at first hearing, like arrogance, like claiming superiority over others. But in truth, its meaning is the opposite. It is not about towering above the world. It is about becoming so deeply aligned with your chosen identity that there is no gap between who you say you are and the reality you live in. In the God state, the words "I am" are not hopeful wishes or distant goals. They are statements of being so coherent that the universe itself moves in harmony with them. History is scattered with examples of people who lived in this alignment. In ancient Egypt, pharaohs were not merely rulers. They were living gods, embodiments of Horus or Ra on earth. Every gesture, every word, every public ritual was a declaration of that identity. And because their society believed it too, reality shaped itself accordingly. The God state in that world was reinforced not just internally, but collectively. In the Roman Empire, the philosopher-emperor Marcus Aurelius ruled during times of war and plague, yet he lived in alignment with the Stoic ideal. His meditations reveal a man who spoke to himself in the language of his chosen identity. Not, I am doomed, but I am the ruler who must meet fate with virtue. He did not wait for events to justify that belief. He embodied it first, and his reign reflected that steadfastness. Modern neuroscience gives this ancient idea a different vocabulary. Researchers speak of self-directed neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself in response to intentional thought and identity. When you think, feel, and act from a chosen self-image, you begin to lay down neural pathways that make that identity more real to your nervous system than the old one ever was. Over time, your mind treats this new identity as fact, and your behaviors, decisions, and even perceptions align with it automatically. Quantum physics offers another lens. In the language of the field, your I am statements are not mere words. They are frequency codes. Each one sends a signal into the vast potential of reality, and by the principle of resonance, matching frequencies are drawn into your experience. The God state is the point where your inner vibration and your outer world sing the same note. There is no friction, no contradiction, only coherence. And here is the subtle truth. The God state is not about asking for what you want. It is about embodying the state of already having it. A medieval mystic might say, act as though the blessing is already yours, and heaven will see no reason to withhold it. A modern physicist might say, when your field matches the vibration of a reality, that reality must match you back. Both are pointing to the same phenomenon, but there is a cost to this level of alignment. It demands vigilance. You cannot dip into the God state during a meditation and abandon it the moment your day turns difficult. The ancient Egyptian priest did not forget he was serving the divine when the temple incense faded. The samurai did not forget he was a warrior when the sword was sheathed. The God state must be lived in continuously until it ceases to be a practice and becomes the only way you know yourself to be. In the next part, we will explore how this transformation happens, not as an abstract idea, but as a deliberate rewiring of your subconscious motherboard, so that your old identity no longer overrides the new reality you choose to live. Think of your identity as the motherboard of a vast and intricate machine, your life, every belief you hold, every habit you perform. Every choice you make is a program running on that central board. You can swap out the programs, read new books, try new diets, adopt new schedules. But if the motherboard remains the same, all new programs will eventually run in the same old way. This is why so many people return to familiar struggles, no matter how much effort they invest in change. The old motherboard is built from years, sometimes decades, of unconscious I am statements. A child who hears I am shy from a parent may internalize it, carrying the quiet burden into adulthood, subtly turning down opportunities for connection. A young apprentice in Renaissance Florence, told repeatedly, I am not yet a master, might begin to inhabit the role of a perpetual student, even when their skills rival those of their teacher. These repeated identifications, spoken aloud or silently affirmed, hardwire the mind to expect a certain life. History offers striking examples of those who dared to rewrite their motherboard. Marcus Aurelius, facing relentless wars and plague, refused to dwell in the identity of a besieged ruler. Instead, he cultivated the identity of the philosopher king, aligning every thought and action to that internal image. Similarly, the samurai of feudal Japan lived by the code of Bushido, not because it was convenient, but because embodying the warrior's honor reprogrammed their every reaction, from the battlefield to the tea house. Modern science calls this identity-based habit change. Neuroscientists have found that when we consistently think, feel, and act from a future identity, the brain forms new neural pathways as if that future were happening now. Dr. Joe Dispenza speaks of this as becoming the future self until the body and mind accept it as reality. Bruce Lipton's work in epigenetics shows that our beliefs can even influence the expression of our genes, turning biological potential on or off. But there's a catch. The subconscious is stubborn. If for years you have been saying, "I am unlucky," "I am not good enough," or "I am always struggling," those programs run automatically, often below awareness. A morning affirmation of "I am abundant" will be no match for the accumulated weight of decades of scarcity programming. The field listens to the dominant frequency, not the occasional burst of inspiration. To rewrite the motherboard, you must do two things at once: weaken the old programs and strengthen the new. The Stoics did this through constant self-examination and disciplined thought. Ancient initiates in mystery schools underwent rituals designed to strip away their old identity before being reborn into a new one. The same process can be applied today, without the marble temples and ceremonial robes, through conscious interruption. The moment you catch yourself saying, "I am tired" or "I am broke," you stop. You don't leap to unrealistic positivity. You shift to a neutral but aligned statement. I am restoring my energy. I am learning to manage money with ease. These micro adjustments matter. They interrupt the autopilot of the old motherboard without triggering the mind's resistance to change. Over time, these neutral statements can be elevated into full alignment with the God state. I am vibrant. I am wealthy now. I am a magnet for abundance. This process is not instant. It is a deliberate, patient rewiring. But history, science, and lived experience all point to the same outcome. Once the motherboard changes, the entire system changes with it. The life you experience becomes the inevitable extension of the identity you have claimed and reinforced. In the next part, we will uncover the key that locks in this transformation, the art of embodiment, so that your chosen identity is not something you merely think, but something you inhabit in every breath and gesture. You can think the words 1,000 times. You can write them in journals, chant them in the morning, even carve them into stone. But until the identity you choose is felt in your body, until it seeps into your posture, your breath, your tone of voice, it remains an idea, not a reality. This is where most attempts at transformation fail. They remain in the mind, while the body continues to live in the old story. History is filled with examples of those who understood embodiment instinctively. In Shakespeare's London, actors were expected not only to play their roles on the stage, but to live them off it. A man cast as a king would walk the streets with a deliberate gait, his chin lifted just so, his gestures measured. Even in the taverns, the identity clung to him, not by force, but by inhabitation. In the Japanese samurai tradition, embodiment was not optional. The warrior's training was as much about the rituals of daily life as it was about the sword. Tea ceremonies, calligraphy, and precise etiquette were all part of the same art, living as the warrior in every moment, so that when battle came, there was no gap between self and action. The body had already been rehearsing the identity for years. Modern neuroscience offers an explanation. The body stores emotional memory in the nervous system. If abundance, love, or success feel unsafe, perhaps because they are unfamiliar or associated with past loss, the body will resist them, even when the mind desires them. This is why affirmations spoken without embodiment often feel hollow. The nervous system hears the words, but does not believe them. The work, then, is to bridge mind and body until they speak the same language. Breathwork can be a powerful bridge. Slowing the breath, relaxing the shoulders, sending the signal of safety to the nervous system while holding the chosen I am statement. Visualization works best when it is multisensory, not just seeing the desired reality, but hearing its sounds, feeling its textures, inhabiting it with all the senses. Consider an example. A merchant in ancient Carthage, envisioning himself as prosperous, might not simply picture coins in his hand. He would imagine the weight of them, the shine in the torchlight, the murmurs of buyers in the market, the smell of spices in the air. The body responds to these cues as if they were real, and the subconscious begins to accept the new identity as fact. When embodiment is consistent, something subtle happens. The mind stops needing to try to believe. You wake up already feeling like the person you have declared yourself to be. Your movements, your choices, even the way others respond to you begins to shift. Not because you force the change, but because your frequency now matches your declaration. In the next part, we will see how this embodied identity plays out in the flow of daily life. How living in the God state becomes a constant feedback loop between the self you affirm and the reality that mirrors it back to you. To live in the God state is to turn identity from a ritual into a constant way of being. It is not something you visit for a few minutes during meditation or in the quiet before sleep. It is the air you breathe, the skin you wear. The transformation begins with a simple but disciplined loop. Pause, feel, act. The pause is the moment of power. Before speaking, before reacting, before stepping into a room, you stop. This small act interrupts the automatic scripts of the old self. It is the same kind of pause a seasoned general might take before addressing his troops, or a queen before delivering a decree, a heartbeat of silence in which the identity is chosen. Next comes the feeling. You don't merely think, I am abundant or I am magnetic. You let it inhabit your muscles and your breath. Shoulders drop, the chest opens, the eyes meet the world with quiet certainty. Gandhi, it is said, could walk into a room and alter its atmosphere without saying a word. His presence was the echo of an identity he carried with unshakable coherence. Cleopatra, stepping onto her barge to meet Caesar, did not need to declare her power. Every tilt of her head, every measured glance spoke it. Finally, the action. From this embodied state, you move. The email is written as the abundant self, the conversation held as the confident self, the decision made as the leader self. You do not wait for proof before acting. You act as if proof has already arrived. And because identity dictates perception, the world begins to reflect that assumption back to you. Physics calls this resonance. When two frequencies align, they amplify each other. In human life, it works much the same way. A person living in the God state becomes like a struck tuning fork, drawing into vibration the people, opportunities, and events that match their note. There is no strain, no desperate grasping. The reality comes because it has been tuned to come. History gives us countless examples. Napoleon was not the tallest man in his ranks, yet his soldiers saw him as a giant because he moved with the certainty of command. Leonardo da Vinci often dressed not as a struggling artist, but as a court gentleman, inhabiting the role that allowed him to move among patrons and royalty, where his genius could flourish. These were not accidents of fate. They were deliberate embodiments that reshaped the stage on which they acted. The more consistently you live in this state, the less it feels like effort, and the more it becomes your default. The pauses grow shorter, the feelings arrive faster, and the actions flow without hesitation. This is the God state as daily life, a steady broadcast of identity that the universe cannot help but echo. In the next part, we will explore how this steady alignment creates a feedback loop, where each proof from the outer world strengthens the inner identity, and each deepened identity draws in even greater proof. Once you begin living from the God state, something subtle but profound starts to happen. Reality begins to mirror your identity with increasing precision. At first, the shifts may be small: a chance conversation, an unexpected invitation, a tiny piece of proof that your new self is real. But each of these moments plants a seed in the mind, and as the seeds multiply, the belief grows deeper roots. This is the feedback loop. Your chosen identity shapes your actions and presence, which alters the way the world responds to you, which in turn reinforces the identity. It becomes a self-sustaining circuit. The more the outer world reflects your inner truth, the less you feel the need to question it, and the stronger your broadcast becomes. History has seen this loop play out on grand scales. The Renaissance masters believed their work was divinely inspired, and so they approached each commission as if guided by something higher. That belief infused their art with a quality that patrons and courts recognized as rare, and their reputations grew. Michelangelo was sought out because he worked like one chosen by God, and being treated as such only deepened his sense of destiny. Even in political revolutions, the loop has appeared. Consider the American patriots in the late 18th century. Long before independence was won, they referred to themselves as free men, as citizens rather than subjects. This identity shaped their actions: bold, defiant, unwavering, and each small victory on the battlefield confirmed the truth of their claim. The declaration, "We are free," was not a description of present reality, but a seed of the future that reality eventually caught up to. On a personal level, the same principle applies. A person who embodies "I am a writer" will begin to act as one. Carrying a notebook, studying language, seeking stories. When their first article is published, that external proof strengthens the identity, making it even easier to write the next piece. The loop spins faster. The same is true for "I am healthy" or "I am prosperous." The early signs of alignment create a momentum that draws in more of the same. But here lies the paradox. The loop can just as easily reinforce a disempowered identity. If you live as "I am unlucky," life will offer proof, missed chances, failed ventures, that confirms the belief. And each new piece of evidence strengthens the signal until it feels unshakable. The loop doesn't care if your identity serves you or not. It only knows how to strengthen what you broadcast. This is why mastery of the God state requires a kind of vigilance that never sleeps. You must decide again and again which loop you are feeding. The ancients understood this. The Stoics kept daily journals to track their thoughts. The mystics practiced constant remembrance of the divine. The warriors rehearsed their code until it was second nature. These were not casual habits. They were safeguards for the identity they chose to live by. In the next part, we will bring the journey full circle, returning to the eternal declaration, "I am that I am," and seeing how it can be anchored so deeply in the present moment that it becomes the permanent home of your being. At the end of all the philosophies, rituals, and experiments, there is a return to the simplest truth. I am that I am. It is the phrase that echoed from the burning bush, the mantra whispered by mystics, the statement that needs no justification. It does not plead or promise. It declares. And once declared from a place of coherence, the universe has no choice but to reflect it. Anchoring the God state means making it your residence, not a place you visit when conditions are right. Ancient mystics understood this as abiding, living in a state of identity so constant that even in hardship, you do not step out of it. For a Sufi poet, this meant seeing himself as one with the beloved in every breath. For a Zen monk, it was the understanding that the Buddha nature was not something to find, but something already present in each moment. In modern terms, this anchoring is about stabilizing frequency. Your thoughts, emotions, and physical state remain in harmony with your chosen I am, regardless of temporary setbacks. It is the art of refusing to hand the final word to present circumstances. The wealth you affirm today might not yet show in your bank account. The love you declare might not yet be standing in your doorway. But in the God state, these are not signs of failure. They are simply the echoes of the old reality still fading away. The key is to hold the vibration without demanding proof. The moment you start chasing evidence, you step back into the role of the seeker instead of the one who is. In quantum terms, you've shifted from being the observer who collapses the wave to the one who waits for the wave to collapse on its own. The God state does not wait. It decides, and in deciding, it becomes. Anchoring also means tending to your environment, for the field you live in will either stabilize or disrupt your frequency. Ancient temples were built with geometry, sound, and light designed to amplify sacred states of consciousness. You can create your own version. Surround yourself with symbols, sounds, and people that reinforce your chosen identity. Let your home, your clothing, even the objects on your desk remind you of who you have chosen to be. When anchored, the God state is self-reinforcing. You wake in the morning, already tuned to it, move through the day with its rhythm, and fall asleep still within its embrace. Life's challenges no longer drag you into the old frequencies because the identity is now woven into your nervous system, your habits, your very perception of the world. And so the circle closes. The I am you speak is not a wish whispered into the void. It is the voice of the universe speaking through you. You are not waiting for life to tell you who you are. You are telling life what it will be. This is the bridge between the seen and the unseen, the science and the spirit, the human and the divine. Take a deep breath. Place your hand over your heart. Feel the weight of every life that has ever declared these words before you, kings and shepherds, warriors and poets, scientists and saints, and know that in this moment you join them. Say it, not as a question, not as a hope, but as the truth of your being. I am that I am.